Hello, welcome to revision tips for CIPS Level 4, Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 2, which is defining the business needs, learning outcome 2, to understand market management in procurement and supply. So we're going to look at the different types of markets, compare the competitive forces that influence those markets, and contrast the breakdown between direct and indirect costs and the type of data that can provide the information on the costs and price. So markets, we no longer have to see someone in real life in order to do business with them. A market can still mean a collection of stores where we go to shop. But in contrast with that, buyers and sellers interact with businesses every day online and in other methods. Here are some of the reasons why we need to analyse markets. We've referred in the past to information being power, so the more information we know about the markets, the more we analyse the information, the more knowledge we have. So for example, if we know a supplier of a strategic item is having difficulties, we can do something about it. If we didn't know, we could suddenly have to deal with production stoppages due to the lack of a strategic item. And if we didn't analyse markets, we may be paying more than we need to. We may be missing out on new sources of supply, and we may not be aware of new products. We also may not be aware that a supplier is having any difficulties that will disrupt the continuity of supply. So we're now going to look at different industries, and we'll start with the manufacturing industry. Their objectives include improving quality, reducing costs, speeding up the throughput, and increasing flexibility. So its drivers will be consumers' desire for differentiated products and an increasing role for intelligent products that integrate with a connected world. They'll need to try and reduce the time to market as well as increase productivity and reduce costs by doing more with less. The manufacturing industry is predominantly owned by shareholders. Raw materials are a commodity, and components and finished products are non-commodity. But the manufacturing market is very diverse. There are 20 or more subdivisions in the standard industry classification system. So when analysing a large market, you need to segment it into buying groups that have the same or similar needs, and organisations whose products and services are aimed at meeting those needs. So an example of a market in the manufacturing sector is the automotive market. We're now going to look at the construction industry, and in general there are three sectors of construction: buildings, infrastructure and industrial. Building construction is further divided into residential and non-residential, or sometimes known as commercial or institutional. The sector of national economy that's engaged in the preparation of land and construction, the alteration and repairs of buildings, structures and other real property. The Construction Industry Council is the representative forum for professional bodies. Research organisations and specialist business associates also come into the construction industry, and their service to members includes providing contracts and standard form agreements as well as policy development. Okay, now we're looking at the retail industry. The primary objectives of retail is to grow the market share, increase their brand awareness and enhance customer relationships, introducing new products to the market. So its drivers will be economic growth and levels of unemployment, a shift from bricks and mortar retailing to online shopping, the ability to collect and analyse data to identify their consumer needs, and the need to think about the rise in social media, which is shifting power to the consumer. Now, many retail markets are coordinated and managed by large retail groups using a global network of smaller suppliers. They may be owned by franchisees, there could be sole traders, shareholders. But food retailing is a mixture of commodity and branded non-commodity products. Other retailers are largely non-commodity. So think about an example of a retail supplier. Do they provide commodities or non-commodities? Or have you been involved with, or are you aware of any negotiations that might have taken place with that retail supplier? And based on that, what power did the supplier exert in that negotiation? The financial industry. So financial services are the economic services provided by the finance industry, and it encompasses a broad range of businesses that manage money, including credit unions, banks, credit card companies, insurance, accountancy, and consumer finance companies, stock brokerage, investment funds, individual managers, and even some government-sponsored enterprises. The financial services companies are present in all economically developed geographical locations and tend to cluster in local, national, or regional, or even international finance centres like London, New York, and Tokyo. Agriculture is the science and art of cultivating plants and livestock. Agriculture was the key development in the rise of sedentary human civilization, whereby farming of domestic species created food surpluses that enabled people to live in cities. The history of agriculture began thousands of years ago. But some major trends in agriculture include the rising population and resulting increase in food demand, food loss and waste, farm robotics, and remote sensing. And then we have the service industry, and the primary objective of services is to achieve high customer service, to build customer relationships, and continually improve processes to empower staff. Its drivers will include the ability and availability of high quality staff, increasing linkages of services to products to create total solutions for their clients, and the need to differentiate offers versus those of their competitors. In largely people-based businesses, individuals are coordinated and managed by individual service companies. They may be owned by sole traders, limited companies, franchisees, or partnerships. And lawyers, architects, and management consultants are examples of professionals that work primarily in the service market. Now, CIPS state that the first part of industry analysis is to understand the attractiveness of an industry. This enables another of Michael Porter's theories to be introduced. We'll discuss that one on the next slide. But the competitive forces that influence market is the basic purpose of a market is to provide products and services that deliver value to the buyer by meeting its needs. And if that can be done at a price that's greater than the cost, then profit is created. And is it the sustainability of this profit that results in a healthy market? So here we can see Porter's 5 forces on the right-hand side. And for a market to be sustainable in the long term, it has to be profitable for the business that it's competing in. And those businesses must be able to find ways to remain competitive. And analysing the forces that act on an industry will help to understand the attractiveness of that industry. Porter proposed 5 forces that act on that. So you have, for example, the threat of new entrants at the top. If a market enables all firms within it to make a profit, it's likely to attract new firms. However, there can be a number of barriers to a firm entering into a market. Those barriers are higher in the bottom threat of substitutes. The risk of buyers switching to an alternative product or service is difficult. Buyer power on the right-hand side is the amount of bargaining power that a buyer exerts in an industry. It can come from a group of buyers all asking for the same thing, or an individual company in an industry that has a few buyers. Supplier power on the left is the amount of supplier power that they can exert on the firms or their industries. And the rivalry in the middle, this will exist between firms, and it means that it can be a positive action to try and make the market share or take the market share from one another, which in turn can lead to increased profits for those who gain market share and power, and lower profits to those that lose. If market share is taken by reducing prices, it can reduce the profits in the industry as a whole. On the left-hand side, I like to link the Porter's forces to how the market actually looks. So when the supplier has the power, if you look along the supply power line in that graph, the maximum supply power is known as a monopoly, where there's only really one supplier. When the buyer has all the power, it's where the supplier has zero. So the buyer's bargaining power will lead to a situation known as perfect competition, because there's many suppliers with very identical products. When you have a potential threat of entrance at the top, this is known as monopolistic competition. So the suppliers have got low power because there isn't a huge amount of barriers to entering into that market, but they tend to compete on different products. So there is a chance that somebody will compete on that. And at the bottom, the threat of substitutes, the supplier has kind of medium to high power here. Typically, you have between 2 and 10 suppliers in this sort of industry, which is known as an oligopoly. If it's only got 2, then it's known as a duopoly. But the products are generally very different, so they tend not to compete on price. So just thinking about that bargaining strength. So bargaining power is the ability for a buyer or a supplier to make more demands and take more of the available profit for themselves. So when a buyer's bargaining power is strong, it means they're able to make more demands on the supplier in respect of factors such as product quality and product functionality. But this will increase suppliers' costs and reduce their profitability. The buyer's power is strong when the buyers are more concentrated than sellers, where the buyer's switching costs are low, the threat of backward integration is high, where buyers are price sensitive and well informed about the product or service. The product or service is not different, and they purchase in large volumes, and where substitutes are readily available. So the amount purchased by the buyer is a significant proportion of the supplier's sales. But if the supplier's bargaining power is high, then they can keep the price of their product or service high and so retain more of the available profit. Suppliers' bargaining power is strong when there's no substitutes, suppliers are larger than the firms or the industries are more concentrated. If the industry is not very important to the seller and the seller's products and services is an important part of the industry's value chain and they're differentiated in some way. Their power is also high when there's significant switching costs for the buyer and the sellers pose a definite threat of forward integration. Now, information obtained from companies' annual accounts can be used to calculate the cost. So direct cost can be calculated by subtracting the gross profit from the revenue for a period. And indirects can be calculated by subtracting revenue from the net profit. And fixed and variable costs can be calculated as well. So obtain costs and output values from a number of similar organisations, then plot them on the graph to find the line of best fit. This is the line that goes approximately through the middle of the data points. The point where the line of the best fit crosses the y-axis, where the output is 0, is the probable value of fixed costs for the industry. The slope of the line of the best fit is the approximate variable cost of the industry. So you can take a point at the right-hand line of the end of the line for the best fit and note its costs and output levels. Then divide the cost by the output, and this gives an approximate figure for the cost per unit or the output or variable cost. At this stage, the view could be taken that fixed costs are mostly indirect costs and variable costs are mostly direct costs. Now, purchasing budgets estimate how much money will be spent on raw materials and components, as well as services and outsourcing for a period. So direct and indirect costs are used to construct a purchasing budget. So you calculate the quantity of a raw material needed. The budgeted number of units to be manufactured, you multiply it by the quantity of raw materials per item. To calculate the quantity of the raw materials that an organisation needs, it's the inventory at the start of the budget period plus the quantity needed for production. And the inventory needed at the end of the period should be deducted. Now, both of these figures can be obtained from the manufacturing budget and the bill of materials. And if you have a thorough understanding of the cost build-up, you can work out which suppliers to identify ways to reduce the cost. And this is for both parties. It should be done without reducing quality. This is called evidence-based negotiation. So these are some of the things that you can test with suppliers prior to purchase. You can ask them, do any of the materials or components cost look high? And is that because the supplier has little negotiating power with their suppliers? Could any of the materials be swapped to something alternative that costs less? What utilisation levels of the machinery used in manufacturing have been assumed? Is this reasonable to give that there will be downtime for setting up the machines for maintenance? Would a change in specification allow different machines to be used that have a high utilisation, as this would give a lower unit cost? And is the manufacturing process different to what organisation expected? Can its own manufacturing engineers offer an alternative without a change to the specification of the product? What batch sizes are they using? Is the utilisation of machinery low because of the short production runs? Can that be improved with better production planning? What labour costs might be involved? Are they appropriate for the type of processes being used? And are the staff properly trained? What are the indirect costs? And on what basis have they been apportioned to the product? Is it fair? What's the supplier's break-even point? And is the supplier over-recovering its costs? So quite a lot to consider there. And that's the end of Learning Outcome 2. Thank you for watching.